Good evening. This is a regular session of the subcommittee, the Public Works Subcommittee to the RTM. The date is July 27. It is 8 o'clock. And I'm calling this meeting to order. Thank you. First off, thank you all for attending. We've got someone asked the question, why are we having this meeting? There are several items, several activities going on related to 2 or 3 major topics I know that this committee's been covering diligently the past few months. And so we're going to review what's been going on at least on several topics, but certainly the 2 or 3 items where there's been activity either by the ARPA Committee, Advisory Committee, the Great Island Advisory Committee, and then Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen have been active related to some of those items as well. So I'm going to be following the agenda. Everyone got the agenda that was distributed in the minutes that were distributed. I don't have any other announcements other than what I just shared. Were there any comments on the minutes of June 29? Edits, changes, great. I'll entertain a motion. Okay, yeah. Second? Second. All in favor? Any abstentions?
I'm abstaining.
Oh, I should abstain, I wasn't here.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you said it.
I'll say it every time. There's no need to abstain just because you weren't here. If you read them and agree with generally the content, you're fine. So Frank's going to abstain.
Yes, sir.
I will
You're
abstain.
going to abstain.
I'm not abstaining. I didn't attend either.
Yes, that's okay. Ro, do you need I have a sheet if you want to record what I can do for you. You just hand you this free-form, so you just, or maybe someone, you just hand it right, if you're busy doing the notes, just hand it to the person next to you, and they'll just record the vote. That's record the vote. You had 2 abstentions. On that list that you're looking at, the ones are folks who I believe are up here, acknowledge they're going to be here. The X's are not here, and the 2 blanks I wasn't certain of. So that you've got your attendance right there. Just use the next column over to record the vote on the minutes. Thank you. We're just going to follow the order of the focus areas. There may or may not be updates or reports from each of these groups. Starting with the top, finance and budget. I don't have any update on finance or budget. Nothing there. That's not unusual for right after. I will touch on, there was an update. There was a ARPA committee meeting. And I think we'll touch on what was addressed there when we get to the flooding section, because there was some recommendations made by the ARPA committee was reconstituted, but met, put back together and met, and went through items on the original ARPA budget, the current budget. They went through and they made some adjustments to some items that had to be closed out, projects that were completed. Actually, Will, do you have a list of the items that were closed out? I went through the video and tracked the items that I know got funded in the end. But there were 3 categories. There were items that were closed out.
Right.
There were items that were added, recommended, to be clear.
Yeah, all these are recommendations to the board.
That's right. The ARPA committee is an advisory committee. So the ARPA committee recommended certain items be closed out because projects were winding down or had winded down. There were several projects that were identified as maybe could be added to the ARPA list to use the funds that were available. And then the Board of Finance, and then there were also some additional items related to projects that were scaled back, either because they weren't ready, and so the amount was revised. Those are the 3 major categories, Bill. Did you have a breakdown a little more? I got some of it. I can help out.
Well, the things that they added to, as I understand it, are more monies that were apparently required than what they originally had estimated for the ARPA list when it was first drafted. Whatever, I don't know how many, 18 months ago, or no, 12 months ago, March of last year. So the additions were a website upgrade, $15,000, personal protection gear, $18,000, new paddle court weed beach, $30,000, joint and mortar repair, not exactly sure
That's
where.
Norotan Heights.
Okay, Norotan Heights. $35,000. Bridge repair, Old Kings Highway South, and added 80,000, yeah. Auditorium and meeting room upgrades, 80,000. Bridge repair, Rings End Road, 110. And then 2 new items, fire marshal vehicle, 77.5, and EMS advanced vehicle, 95,000.
Rowan, I can attach this to the minutes, don't.
I would have thought that.
So those were items that they recommended be adjusted to account for basically categorically higher costs than originally budgeted. Then there were some adjustments downward. I didn't get a complete list of what those were. There were a lot of.
No, I didn't either, but I mean, the two.
The two ones we care about the most in this committee.
Right.
If you recall, the ARPA original list had the Grove Street drainage project in an initial budget, and the Salt Box drainage project in an initial budget. I don't have what the original amounts were.
Well, the salt box was 1.5 mil, and the Tilly Pond was 1 mil. And yeah, I think the feeling was that because of the timing of those projects, and also the fact that with the studies that are coming through, that the estimated costs are greater than anticipated, that they're going to reduce those amounts out of ARPA, but they will leave $250,000 for each project for the purpose of proceeding for design.
Right. To be clear, the ARPA committee recommended to the Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen.
So Board of Selectmen recommended to the Board of Finance, and ultimately Board of Finance approved what Rolf was just basically describing, and that is to retain, per Director of Public Works' estimate, $250,000 to fund the design and cost estimate phase of those two projects in particular. If you watch the Board of Finance meeting, there was a lot of debate back and forth as to what was that for. I thought the initial study had an estimate, which it did, and there was a fair amount of talk, and those of you who've been involved in other capital projects probably know, a study is one thing. To design a project and come up with a pretty solid estimate is a whole higher level of diligence, and there's a lot of back and forth during the Board of Finance meeting about that. That's what this 250 is to put together a set and ultimately come up with a more solid cost estimate, given the point you just made about the original estimate used for ARPA was one figure, and then the study came up with a figure of, I can't remember, it was 4x, 5x, 6x.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was 6.8.
But the reduction of the use of ARPA was because of the timing.
Yes.
Because the ARPA funds have to be used over in a certain period of time.
And that's
So it's, even though the cost of the projects are higher,
Yeah.
because of the time lag, we're not going to be able to use as much money as we thought we were going to be able to use.
That's exactly right.
Right.
At high level, I believe they have to be committed, firmly committed by the end of
Contract.
2024, and used, spent, completed by 26.
Right.
And I guess the risk there is if you miss either of those, you risk, there's a possibility of a clawback or a loss.
And ARPA is government money or
Yeah.
Federal.
federal?
American Recovery.
Or something.
It's just a different pocket.
Okay.
Yes.
It's all ours.
Federal tax. So the takeaway is that the Board of Finance approved the next step in those two projects, which is to get a design and a more solid cost estimate. My understanding in listening to the dialogue, and what my understanding was before the dialogue, was once they have a better handle on either or both of those projects, they would then, that those projects would go through the process for approval, recommendation of the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and the RTM, I believe.
There's a time limit, isn't there?
To the ARPA money, there's a time.
Which is why, going back to, which is why they left in the ARPA list for funding the part that Ed felt certain could be completed.
In
To
time.
get the, right, versus launching on the project
Right.
and not being able to commit to it, whether it's a permit approval, environmental commission approval, whatever state approval. That salt box project, we know, is going to require all sorts of approvals from the public hearing that was held 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. So yes, they've tried to mitigate the timing issue as it relates to the portion of any project, not just these, funded with ARPA money. So we toss that under budget.
Yeah, well, that is budget
We
related.
tossed it, totally. And we're probably going to touch on it again under flooding, but with regard to ARPA and what the, let's see, so those are the, do you touch on all three categories? There's the, there were a few other items that I think agreed to be funded. I didn't catch the numbers, but there was the ARPA committee recommended adding the garage floor, and that got included and approved.
Yes.
And I've got two more here, but I don't have the amounts. I remember the garage floor one being several $100,000. I just don't have. the figure.
Yeah, I think it brings the total up to like 800.
Yep, yeah, maybe even a bit more.
So it sounds to me like because we couldn't spend the money, the ARPA money, fast enough, that money then got freed up.
Yeah,
And
But
allocated.
then isn't there another $1 million flying around somewhere that's not allocated? If you totaled up to 800?
It was, yes, so let me finish the list here, but your concept is exactly right.
Okay.
So you've got a group of projects that, or items that were coming in higher than expected. Some ARPA money was allocated to that. A big clawback from the flooding projects that are now reversed out, and only the 250 for the cost study. There were some small adjustments for things pulled out. And then some adds, which were adds that weren't in the fiscal budget. And I say that because of the adds, the items that were listed were items that were cost overruns. There were two that were new adds being pulled out of the fiscal budget and added to the ARPA list. The fly car that Rolf mentioned and the fire marshal vehicle. Okay, so now you've got the next few items I'm going to mention weren't in the fiscal budget, aren't projects that are just being topped up, but are new projects that the ARPA committee recommended to the Board of Selectmen and I think ultimately approved by the Board of Finance. They're the garage floor, the public DPW garage floor. And for the sake of clarity, not the garage floor that was part of the recent renovation of the garage. It's a different part. I've got on the list here, Roman Heights retaining wall
Yeah, at the fire
at
department.
the fire department, some landscaping at Highland Farm. I apologize, I don't have the figures on this. Kate will be updating the list for the next Board of Finance meeting, and I'll get that, I'll share it with this group. And then, I think those are the items, the ARPA committee, those are the items. But the big dollar number I remember being the floor of the garage, $795 or even change.
Wow.
And so, to your point, after all these reductions, additions, and top-ups, there's still an amount left. That's the worksheet I want to get, we will get, once it's provided to the Board of Finance, and we'll be up to date, but high level, that's what's.
Are there restrictions for what can't be used for ARPA money? Or what ARPA money can't be used for, better words?
I'm not going to pretend to be an ARPA expert.
No, I'm not.
So
either.
There are restrictions.
I remember the act definitely has restrictions in it, but it sounds like if we've thrown in landscaping.
There was a discussion about that, and that everything that's listed here, the consensus being fits within the definition. But I don't want to try to.
It's interesting, fire marshal, new ads, the fire marshal vehicle and the EMS fly vehicle were neither a part of the budget that was cut. It wasn't cut from the capital budget.
It's new.
They're literally, they weren't even on the 2022 ARPA list. So they're literally brand new from out of thin air.
I think they're from the fiscal '24 budget.
Are they? Okay.
So they're pulling it forward?
Your recollection is better than
I
mine.
just listened to it.
But they weren't on the ARPA. They weren't on
They weren't on the original ARPA
They weren't
list.
on the original
Right.
ARPA list below the line.
Yeah, so I'm, someone checked the '24 budget. 24 is the budget we're in now.
Yeah.
So the top-ups were all the items except the last two that were all recited. The fire marshal vehicle and the EMS fly car, I understood to be pulled out of the fiscal '24 budget and will be added to the ARPA list because the discussion went on to say, those amounts, 77,500 and 95,000, can then be put back into the capital reserve. So that whole line of discussion only is valid if they were in the budget.
Right, got it.
Okay, so
that makes sense.
And I listened to that part at 0.5 speed to make sure I got it right. I think I covered that. Any questions?
Nope.
All right, we got through that.
But there is a new balance that's still
Yes.
unspent, if you will.
Allocated.
My understanding, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about $2 million.
Yes, yes.
So-
In my re-listen, I
Any
tried to
ideas?
figure it out.
I mean, it seems like some other people in town have ideas, certainly. I'm surprised they didn't bring up Ed's
Hanson was brought up.
Hanson Road Bridge.
Yes.
It's like one.
And if I understood the conversation on that,
Yeah,
at the
he's-
tail end of the meeting, it's not ready.
Yeah, he's still busy making engineering plans for that as well. I don't think he's ready on
And I
that.
think that right now is caught up in the, can it hit the commitment deadline, can it hit the completion? I don't know why it can't, but that's what the conversation at Board of Finance.
It's turned into
revolved
a more
around.
complicated project. than it's-
Yes. And there again, if there's a risk it can't be complete, hit one of those two deadlines, err on the side of caution and put something in if we have it, not we, the town has it, that qualifies, that can with certainty hit those two deadlines. Okay. Roads and sidewalks. Who's on roads?
I mean, I'm on sidewalks.
Mhm.
The only thing that I have to say is that I did take a ride down by Weston to Roten, and that's moving along. So I think pretty soon that sidewalk will be completed. And I think you were gonna walk us through that really long document from
132
2015.
page.
132
So,
page.
yeah.
Lots of
Yeah.
Do you want to do that now? I mean,
Yes.
I'm not going to walk through 132 pages.
No, I'm sure that's why you're here. What I'd like to suggest here.
Get comfortable.
What I'd like to suggest on that is just a high-level recap, because on the last meeting, there was some uncertainty as to when that was published. You weren't here, Frank, I don't think you were.
I missed the meeting, but I was
Yes.
here, I was,
You're here in spirit, for sure.
no, but more important, I was here in 2015 when that was put
Yes.
together.
And I'm ashamed to say we waffled on when it was and what the high-level conclusions were.
Right.
So
I mean, I'm glad
we
to
agreed
speak
to
to
do a high-level
Yeah,
overview.
so it was finalized December of 2015. It came out of the pedestrian infrastructure advisory committee. That's what they concluded. They did a fairly extensive 132 pages as the result of a study that was done. The wonder of working or living in a small town is that they actually covered a good portion of the town. In terms of the focus areas, it was on the areas around the schools, around the main downtown and the two train stations, and the beaches, and did an extensive review of what is the current condition, what are the kinds of conditions that what can we improve on, what can't we improve on. There were just as a sidebar, a couple of numbers. There were recommendations of 115 crosswalks to be installed, meaning painting and identifying or reinstalling, because a lot of them have become unclear.
How much of that? I missed the numbers.
There were 115
Spots.
crosswalks,
Got it.
right,
All
identified
across
as crosswalks.
Okay.
In terms of sidewalks, there were 25 different conditions across the town, which include both extensions and new, that were identified as recommended for some plan to be included in the plan, and 27 bike lanes around the town. So there really is no oversight of this. This was an advisory committee to the Board of Selectmen. This is pre-COVID. I would argue that the conditions in town in terms of pedestrian traffic have changed. Since then, we've had Roden Heights all the developments in Roden Heights and downtown starting to come on. Some of that was anticipated in the study, but those plans were still in progress and not approved, and obviously Norton Heights has changed somewhat. And on top of that, the state has also started to impose its will on what's going to happen around our infrastructure between 95 and train stations. So all of these sort of things have changed in the last 8 years. I was left wanting. I got through the 132 pages. And a lot of it is pictures and arrows, and actually very well done. And it was supposed to have been a committee to follow up and what's the status of this. And as I looked through a number of the conditions, some have been addressed, many have not. Locust Hill Road, for example, on the sidewalk, we finally got that extension and the crossover so that you can get underneath the highway so people can walk to the train station. Those types of things. Other things were not addressed, like Talmadge Hill Station and along Route 106. I mean, that was just sort of left. I don't think decisions have been made.
If I can ask a question, so there was a committee that was supposed to follow up. Was that a committee?
There was no committee.
No, there was intended to be.
Intended to be, but there's really been no follow-up.
Understood, but could you tell from the intention, was it intended to be a standalone advisory committee or a committee within the RTM? Or was it kind of?
No, it was not within the RTM.
Okay,
it was intended to be an advisory committee to the Board of Selectmen.
Got it.
And once it completed its work, and left for the Board of Selectmen at the time to decide what to do. And I think the royal they, have chosen to sort of cherry pick some of the conditions, either from this report or other projects that need to be done. And I think the start of this discussion really came from, if you'll recall, we don't really know how Ed makes his decisions on what sidewalks to work on and what not to work on. Not that he makes bad decisions, we just don't know what the process is and what the prioritization is. And so that's what got us to the point where I said, well, let's take a look at this. So obviously this is beyond sidewalks, this is about pedestrian infrastructure. So I don't know what our action, and I'm not going to summarize all 132 pages, but it is actually a quick read, and there are some good summaries in it. So I would encourage you, I think Mark passed around the link, to review it. It will remind you of some conditions, and as you drive around town, I don't know that we want to go through all the conditions and catalog them and see whether or not that would ideally, someone should go through and say what's been done, what hasn't been done. That would be a nice little project. We should have hired an intern for the summer to do that. But I don't know what action this committee wants to take, other than perhaps digesting it and coming up with maybe some recommendations on how to follow through.
Anything to add, Frank?
Yeah, first of all, that was excellent, thank you. I would say that there were a few deliverables out of that committee. The primary one was the report that you described, and your description was spot on. I mean, it's mostly a litany of the problems in town and what the recommended solutions are. And to your point, some of them have been done, some of them have not. Kind of without regard to urgency or scale or whatever, I think Ed has knocked off the ones that he's been able to knock off under the direction of the first selectman, whoever that's been at the time. Mm-hmm. The other deliverable from this project was, they literally walked every foot of sidewalk in town. They documented what it was made of, they documented what its condition was, and they gave that database over to Ed. So Ed now has, at least current as of 2015, a list of where all the sidewalks are in town, what the condition was, and I think he has used that to kind of identify the gaps and where can you knit the network together better. The one I do think would be valuable and I think it actually wouldn't be too bad of a situation, and I'll be glad to test this myself, to sit with Ed for an hour and just page through and say, did you do this? Yes, no, move on. Right? It'll be a pretty fast exercise. The original underlying driver of all this, to your point, was the access or lack of it to the Talmadge Hill Station at the north end of Hoyt Street. And that has not yet been done. And that is probably the single highest degree of difficulty because of, it's a state road. Because there are multiple people with stone walls on the side, because one side of the street is a country club for part of the way, because we don't technically have access to Talmadge Hill because it's in New Canaan, for a whole bunch of reasons. But that was, I mean, that problem was and remains probably the single biggest pedestrian issue in town, and we have not addressed that at all. So I throw that out there. So what would we do? I think we as a group could easily sit with Ed, and again, I'll volunteer to do this if we think it's valuable, to sit with Ed and kind of page through the report and see what's been done and what's not been done. What I think we as a group need to consider is whether we want to be more directive to say we put the following things as a priority, and as you approach the, where are we? We're in the 23-24 year. As we approach the 24-25 year, we really want you to deal with this, as opposed to, here's your data and kind of do your best. And their best has been very good. I'm not criticizing. I mean, they've put a whole new sidewalk the length of Tokenique Road. They've put thousands and thousands of feet of sidewalk out there, and they've upgraded from asphalt to concrete. I think Ed's team has done a wonderful job. So this is not to say that anything bad about Ed and his team. I mean, I'm in the back for Ed, but.
Yeah, if I may,
Yeah, sure.
I completely agree that, listen, this is not a judgment on Ed or the DPW in any way. The priority of what gets done when and how that gets budgeted, I think, is more of our purview than anything else. And knowing that and coming back with some recommendations, or at least some sense of what that priority is, I think it's incumbent on us to understand that.
Yeah.
And without judgment, but just trying to understand it. And I do think I would prefer that we come up with a recommended course of action, not to Ed, but to the Board of Selectmen on what the priorities ought to be. This isn't Ed's choice necessarily, and it really probably shouldn't be, other than repairs. But I think the Board of Selectmen have to opine on and show their priorities and either accept or decline what, conditions we think ought to be addressed sooner than later. And this was so extensive, as I went through it and leafed through it, I was a little bit saddened that there was so much work put into this, and it was sort of put over here and said, that's great. And I think, I don't know that a lot of it is because COVID got in the way and priorities got changed, and that's all completely understandable. But we've made it to the other side, so to speak, and I think it's time to reassess, because this is coming up on, this is over 8 years ago, and the world's changed.
Yeah. Well, again, I would say that they've made quite good use of the database of sidewalks that this group also handed over. So that I don't want, I think the work that this group did, which was really quite painstaking, has borne fruit even from the start of 2016 and on.
I think you're probably right, Frank.
Yeah.
And so let me suggest this. In addition to that report, I do know that Ed uses a matrix for the existing sidewalk stock that's been used for a long time that prioritizes what gets refurbished, more on the lines of refurbished and when, and prioritizes. So you've got the ongoing refurbishment, like we do on the roads, that is ongoing, and overlaid on top of that, I do believe the recommendations of that committee and that report have been, I think someone used the word sprinkled, but have been added in over the years. That transcends, 2 or 3 administrations, 2 at least, maybe 3 of them.
Well, several terms of the Stevens administration.
Yep.
And we had 2 now.
And so what I'd suggest is, I appreciate your offer to sit down with Ed. I'd suggest we get an update from Ed, whether one-on-one with someone from the committee or if he wants to come and chat with us. How have the recommendations been implemented? Because I agree with you, Frank. I think many of them have, many of them have not. Almost all of them, I believe, for them to be implemented, have to go through the budgeting process to be approved. So there have been decisions made as to which ones, by the Board of Selectmen, by the Board of Finance, and ultimately through the RTM, which ones have gotten done. But how they got on the list is really the hard question relative to what was published in 2015. So, to be fair, I think to the Public Works Department, maybe a better understanding as to how that's been implemented, over the years, how the decisioning is made. I have to reach out to Ed and see, let them know that's what we'd like to get an update on, and maybe come back.
If I might, as you go through this report, it was very careful about not adding a priority to one over another, because some conditions are more serious than others. And it, obviously, because it covers each of the school districts, if you will, or the areas, I mean, this is all across the town. So there are some parts of town that are more affected than others, obviously. And so I think it's important that we understand the process better. And I don't think it's out of our bounds to make some recommendations on what the priorities ought to be.
That may well be. I don't disagree. Let's get an update as to how it's being implemented to date before making recommendations over.
Well, that would be the next step. It's like, let's get
Just
the
a sequence, yeah.
We may
Find
have to
out where
sit
we
down.
are.
Yeah.
Well, where we are, what's being done.
Yeah.
That may address some questions and still may want to be some
And is it
recommendations.
just sidewalks, or are we talking about the whole study? Because this was sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes,
Well, again,
lighting.
I think each of those pages has it's a yes, no, it's a bullet point format. I mean, again,
Yeah.
they recommended, better lighting, new crosswalk, and, another 500 feet of sidewalk. Was it done? Yes or no? It's a quick tick. And Ed has that all in his head. So it would be a question of just kind of teasing that
And
out.
I think it has to be all of them because they're so intertwined in most places.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think, again, to your point, I think it is I don't know if it's officially our role, but I think it's definitely a role that we can legitimately play to say, okay, you've done great work here with whatever priority process you've set, and that's great, but we now want to take into consideration either volume of usage or degree of danger or volume of traffic or whatever, whatever we think is the appropriate metric. But I mean, I'll be transparent. I mean, I still want to see progress getting made on the upper half of Hoyt Street to get to Talmud Hill, because there are still people walking in the middle of the street after dark in the winter who are, I think, at high risk.
Understood. So let's call for an update about understanding as to how the recommendations have been implemented since 2015.
So Mark, when's our next meeting?
It's going to
Is
be
there one
like,
in August?
It'll be the,
there's certainly one scheduled in August, but
Okay.
you guys want to do it. I'm keeping it on there because, as you can see from the discussion tonight, I don't have it with me, Frank.
it's probably,
Actually, I get them through the calendar, but anyone else have it?
I guess I'm just wondering, like,
It's in August,
do
probably
you,
in August.
I mean, if you guys want me to, I'm glad to sit with Ed and kind of.
I would rather, I think.
Or do you rather maybe have him do it?
Let me reach out and let them know what we.
Well, I don't want to tax Ed's.
That's what, let me just let them know what we're thinking. He might say, oh, here's a list of what's been done. Let me know if you have any questions, that'd be great.
Perfect.
So let me just reach out to him.
7th September is actually our next meeting.
I didn't do August?
No, you did.
It's my birthday. I'm away on my birthday,
Yeah,
so maybe that's why.
It's good discretion of the chair.
If we need one, I could reach out, and if this or one of the other topics we're covering tonight flares up, there may be reasons to. Okay. Thank you for that input and for the refresh.
So are we gonna meet with Ed?
I'm gonna reach out to Ed, let him know what we're looking for. If he's got something available, I'll get it.
Oh.
And then we can follow up if we want to meet. If he's open to meeting with one of us, I'll reach out to Frank. You offered, so I'll reach out to you. I'll reach out.
No, that's fine.
Well, I did on that right.
I know.
Trust me, as far as you can throw me.
Let's see what he's got
All right.
and for time and how he wants to handle. He may want to come in. Sewers? I don't think there's anything. You're still sewers, right, Frank?
In theory, yes, but as we were talking about before you came in, I have not engaged with the sewer
Yep.
folks.
Benny, are you sewers?
Yeah, but
Nothing?
I haven't watched anything or.
Okay. Dams and bridges, you touched dams, I don't have anything on dams and bridges that we. Okay.
I only have one question, and I think I've asked this before. Who owns the rings and dam?
We went through this last time.
I know, and I don't think I know
I don't think
anything
it's
more
been,
than
I don't think it's been.
what I knew
determined.
last time.
We don't know.
It's that's the crux of the issue, is that the ownership and therefore responsibility is what's in the middle of being determined. Or that was my understanding.
Just my understanding too. I don't know where to go for the answer to that.
Well, it's a mystery. But,
Is different
you know,
ownership for the bridge and the dam?
Yes.
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 Wasn't that Steinkraus and Ziegler originally or something? Is that what I remember?
Oh,
No,
All I know is,
predates them.
you know, Ed's
We
getting
don't
ready
think
to
it does.
spend money on repairing that dam for somebody that we don't even know owns it.
I think the decision
You know,
was that through, whether you call it eminent domain or not, we have legally taken title to all of it.
Right.
And we have told the families who supposedly owned it that we have taken title to all of it. So.
But we'll give it back to them.
You know, if they want
First
to pay,
fix
if
it.
they want to pay for it. But no, I think that was the last time I heard from the board and board of selectmen and things like that was
It
legal,
hasn't come up
legal
since.
counsel had established that we could go out and basically own it. And we sent letters out to that effect for like 6 months. Nobody got back to us, so we now own it.
And now you move forward with.
Yes, and now we
repairs.
can move forward because we
And
have
if it's ever
legal.
challenged, you deal with it then.
Right, but the town council had determined that we are in very safe territory doing what we're doing. That's the last I heard.
Sounds pretty settled.
Well, I
think
don't know
it-
if that's all, you know, has that gone all through the entire process of what he needs to do, and is that complete? And-
I believe it was when they updated us the last time, it was done. Like they had already been out there, tried to get a hold of all these families for months.
Yeah, and I know he's done a lot of
Yeah,
work on it.
and the determination was, let's move ahead with the fix.
So Rolf, is your question, are we moving forward with the fix?
I have no knowledge myself that all of that work, if
Yeah.
you will, has been completed, that the records of the town now owning the dam are in fact official, if you will, because we're about to spend whatever money to fix that dam. And in essence, when you fix that dam, you're affecting the entire Gorham's Pond, because without the dam, there is no pond. So the implications, I think, go beyond just the dam itself. You've got two waterways that come down into that pond, Stony Brook.
No, I understand that, I understand how.
So
So
There's a lot
if the town
going on there.
feels that it has taken ownership or has the rights of ownership and is moving forward with the project or plans to move forward with the projects, yes, it impacts downstream and upstream. I'm sorry, I don't understand what's the question other than the clarity on the ownership.
Clarity on the ownership.
That's it.
That is the
That's still the question. Yep. That was dams and bridges. The transfer station, recycle center, swap shop. No update there, right? Is there?
I just circulated the, just for a comparison, the Buchanan's recycling flyer. And I also learned that the quick conclusion I came to is, not that it's a competition between us and Buchanan, but it is.
Of course not.
That they just have a different approach. You know, they charge by the weight and they charge, you know, less. And it's also cheaper. So I think it's 45 if you have somebody picking up. 45 and 75 are the two numbers that I remember, which are significantly cheaper.
And there was a weight limit.
There's a weight limit on garden waste.
I found that interesting.
Yeah.
I'd be curious as to correlation between the fact that there's a limit and the ability to offer the lower fixed or lower rate.
I had a different thought when I saw that, and that was, thank the good Lord that they don't have a weight limit here in Darien, because I'd have been way over it years ago.
It's all your perspective.
That's
isn't it?
right, it's all about your perspective.
How do they weigh garden waste?
Drive, I don't know, because I haven't been in.
They have a scale.
They have scale, I think they weigh
They weigh
everybody.
you in and they weigh you out.
Yeah.
That's the way most
So-
transfer stations I've ever participated.
Well, we do that.
So
too,
it
but-
includes the weight of your car?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going in and coming out, so that doesn't change.
You weigh in at 8,000 and then you weigh out at
Okay.
7,500.
Oh, I see they do it both ways, I see.
Yeah, the same way I weigh my daughter's bag at the airport.
Okay.
I pick it up, I stand on the scale, and then I put it down, I stand on the scale, and the difference is per bag.
And if
Well,
you're
you
smart
get
about
to
it, you
put the
pick
bag
up
on
a
the
few
scale.
people on
Go
the
and
way
stay on the
out.
scale. Go back on the scale.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. All right, so flooding, lots to cover here. We touched on some of it. As it relates, actually, I forwarded a couple of letters to the team that's focusing on flooding from 2 residents that I received, letters regarding support of salt box drainage study and the drainage project in and of itself. My takeaway on at least one and possibly both was, one, clearly the takeaway that they had was that the Board of Finance axed the project. We just covered that. It was from ARPA, and it wasn't an accident of the project. It was as we said, identification and pursuing the part that could be completed within ARPA. They asked that it be distributed, which I distributed to this committee, I think, actually. Did it go to the whole committee? There's-
PwC.
Yeah, and then District 4, the chair, sent to the chair there, we distributed there. I don't know if anyone wanted to follow up with it. I responded that I'd do what they asked, which is circulated. Board of Finance responded to one of them in detail. I don't know if there's anything anyone wants to add to that, but and then the hearing on, the public hearing, I guess, did anyone try to attend? I know, Rolf, I saw you at the public hearing that got postponed earlier this week. I've not heard that that's been rescheduled yet. Have you?
I haven't heard a thing.
Yeah, not yet. So that's on hold. I do know that as I was leaving, that the intention from Ed was to get it rescheduled as soon as possible.
So, public hearing on what?
The Tilly Pond watershed study results.
Yep.
Yeah, he was gonna make a presentation, I'm sure very similar to what was done on May 11th for salt box, except for Tilly Pond. So,
This one, I looked through that document, it's like
yeah,
2 pages.
it's
Yeah, I
on
went through
the
it as well.
town website,
Yeah.
the report itself.
I mean, like the salt box, the recommendation was very clear, option 8, which was the most expensive option, but the scale seemed to be, at least the estimate was significantly less than salt box. It was more on the $11 million bucks.
More in line with the initial
Yeah,
budget.
and it was pretty straightforward, just kind of run a new trunk, bigger, consistent, because it's kind of a Rube Goldberg, so to speak, kind of like salt boxes, different. And the pipes, and they're all substandard and all that, so. I would imagine it would be fairly easy to approve, and the money doesn't sound like it's out of line with what was, initially budgeted, so.
I don't know, as far as adding that back in, I don't know if that would be a project that could get committed and completed to be able to add it back on.
Yeah.
No, because Ed said the timing on that is actually even worse than
Yeah.
salt box.
Yeah.
Because he has to go under Post Road
Oh,
with
yeah.
the work that has to be done.
Well, both have to be
And,
Post Road.
and Metro
But that's
North.
downtown. That was
Metro
downtown.
North.
Metro North, that's the
The
complicated
culvert
part.
underneath the railroad.
Yeah.
He said that.
That's right.
That's a year at
That's
least.
right. I remember that, yes.
So the timing there is just difficult.
All right, so the 3 updates I had under flooding, we've covered all 3. The ARPA portion, we touched on, the letters from the residents, and then the delay. Anything else related to flooding that we need to touch on?
I'm just going to be very curious to see what the detailed plans come out to. Because the Board of Finance was pretty clear, and they said, Palin said he was going to go back to Monica about the monies being spent for the plans, that they feel strongly there should be no proceeding into any further progress on the project until there is a consensus among the Board of Selectmen, I assume themselves, the Board of Finance, and the RTM, to go forward with the project. In other words, we're going to spend this $250, but I don't see why we should spend any more money unless we have a full consensus of the town that this is a project that everybody's behind doing.
That was my takeaway generally
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
I think it was more broad than that. Not to proceed with any project until it goes through until there's a solid estimate from the design drawings and the project goes through the approval process. That it wasn't specific to any one project, but I think categorically
Yeah,
that each project be approved by the normal.
Because there was a clear reluctance voiced by a number of people on Board of Finance that they felt that the spending of the $250 was maybe not necessarily a good use of the ARPA funds. That why would we want to spend this?
I think the vote was 5-1.
When there is no real project and consensus that the town is in fact even going to go ahead with this thing. So why are we spending the $250? But it's like the chicken and the egg, okay? You can't come together with a firm number about
Right.
the project and whether or not you're going to go forward unless you have those design plans.
And that was the view in the room.
Yeah.
Eventually, the room.
You can't go deep without a plan. You can't go to the Army Corps of Engineers without a plan, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
And get a solid cost estimate. Sustainability, Environmental Commission, and Coastal Waters. Well, got anything, Rich?
Coastal waters, certainly no projects that are coming up at all.
Did you receive, you know, with the first meeting of the Great Island Committee, are you aware of any recommendations that might be forthcoming from the Coastal Water Committee or Commission?
Yep, so I'll touch on that on there. Next item is Great Islands. Give me a moment to find my notes. And we'll roll right into that one. So the kickoff meeting was last week. Let me find my notes. So they introduced the four community members that were announced by the Board of Selectmen the previous, well, on July 3rd, I think the Board of Selectmen announced that there was a Bruce Ferguson. His background was provided a little bit, I guess. He's a former software entrepreneur, CEO, active with the Darien IT Committee. I didn't realize that. Former president member of the board of the Darien Nature Center, Library, and Darien Athletic Foundation. I think he was the chair of that one. Second person was a Dan Kowalski. Oh, sorry, before I move on, I think Bruce was also on the Long Range Capital Committee for one of the country clubs, we were Navy. And his comments to the Board of Finance that they quoted where he was interested in careful adaptation for the use of the land. That was his phrase that quoted the meeting. Dan Kowalski is involved in substantial projects in his background that may have to be considered, may have to be considered for Great Island. He was involved with things like Hudson River Park development, Brooklyn Bridge Park project, has 30 years of experience in developing those types of projects. I think he's recently retired because a quip was made about having time to work on the advisory committee and any projects that may come along. Jeff Table has urban planning knowledge. He served as an urban planning director of community environmental planning in Houston. I have this right, 30-plus years. Been in town chatting with him like 18 months or so he's new to town. And then Kip Vesey was put forth as having strong organizational skills along multi-generational family in town. And feels that the purpose, why did he join the committee? The purpose is to serve all, the property should be used to serve all residents in town. So those are the 4 folks that were added to the committee. Give me a moment, I'll recap the full membership of the committee so you can find my list. It was an organizational meeting. There was some discussion about, by the chair, officers were elected. John Sagrazzi is the chair. I am the vice chair. And don't recall, one of the 4 members from the community is the clerk. Now, I understand the clerk is the role of the clerk is actually done by a secretary. So the role of the clerk is probably more interfacing with the public, things of that nature. John did a recap of I'm not going to recap the charge of the commission. I sent that around a few weeks ago. It hasn't changed. And John was suggesting that no business was conducted at this first meeting, that there be a subsequent meeting put together in August, and that we think about breaking up into, he used the word, I think, subcommittees or focus areas, and then we think about some areas to consider for subcommittees for the next meeting. For instance, some ideas that were spitballed, again, just as examples, were infrastructure, and that's an umbrella type of comment relating to something this group's asked about: access. Categorically access, physical access, legal access. It wasn't articulated, it was just generic access. Remediation and transformation was the word used, all in the context of access and remediation. Environmental remediation was mentioned again, community development, coastal. You just asked about getting a group focused on the coastal aspect, given there's so much waterfront, legal, regulatory, historical, preserving. Is it worth giving thought to preserving some of the history, some of the architectural history, things of that sort? Those were just some examples. I got another bullet here that's blank. I must have missed one. None of these were decided on, but the idea is to come back with areas that a divide and conquer type of approach. We went around the room asking for thoughts, first reactions, things that were on people's minds. I flagged this because it came up at least 3 times. I don't know if I mentioned it first, but I certainly mentioned it. And that is, what I get the most questions about is access. How do we gain access? When does the public gain access? What kind of access is that going to be? That was raised by 2 or 3. What can be done and when by folks in the community? Safety, security came up. Roadway access came up again. So what's planned for the next meeting, which is in August, is some of the folks on this committee haven't been to the property. So the idea was to organize
Really?
a visit.
Really? Really?
They got named to the committee and haven't been.
Haven't been.
There's not public access. Don't just assume, because it came up. On the committee, we don't have access unless you go with
I would think anybody who applied for that should have been given like a tour.
Well,
Or asked for it.
I think they're gonna set that up now.
I'm not certain. I got the impression.
Since you're on the committee.
Since you're on the committee.
Water under the bridge.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, I'm not sure that, I'm not certain, but I got the sense that one or more perhaps had not been on the property.
Fresh eyes.
I don't think that necessarily is an imperative that you be there to have a view as to what role you can play. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, no, I was just surprised.
So next steps were, A, to have staff, perhaps the first selectman with the Public Works Director, bring this group up to speed as to what's been going on there since we acquired it. Remediation, I know, there was some mention about signage, there's some things of that sort. So at the next meeting, there's going to be an update for the folks on the committee, and they're planning a site visit, probably similar, in my mind, to what those of us in the RTM were able to do. Remember, these folks weren't on the RTM, when would they have had a chance? Short of just going there on their bicycles and their cars and doing it. I don't think. Anyway, I respect the fact that if they were told not to go, they didn't go.
Rule followers at their end, nothing else.
So that's the update. I didn't give you the full list of who's on it.
I have it here if you want.
Yeah, you have it there.
Yeah, got it, too.
You have it there.
Mark Adeletta,
Yeah.
Lori Bora, who's the chair of the Parks and Rec Commission,
Parks and Rec, yeah.
Michael Burke, Bruce Ferguson, Dan Kolakowski, Jim Palin,
Board of Finance.
Board of Finance, Jeffrey Table, who's one of the residents, Kip Vesey, who's another resident member, and John Zagrodzky.
Board of
Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen. Board of Selectmen.
And not to belabor the obvious, but Mark, I assume that Kip Vesey is son or grandson of John Vesey, the former Republican registrar.
I don't know that name, so you might be right. We can look it up. I don't know who he was. And then there's ad hoc members, which I really wanted to touch on. Is that on there as well?
Yeah, just the
Yeah.
official members.
Because I think
Well, first of
Well,
all,
Soundwalkers.
For Great Island, can I make a special request? I mean, a request that you make to the committee, the advisory. I know that Long Neck Point along, and then Rings End, well, not Rings End, but that would be Good Wives, thanks. Good Wives. It has a sewer line, it has a pump sewer line. I doubt the Steincrafts and Zieglers have gone to the expense of connecting or bringing that all in. And so as part of the remediation, hooking up all the buildings up to the town sewer. Be real
So
helpful.
just so I understand, I appreciate the thought. So there's a pump, there's a sewer line down there?
There's
and
a
pump
sewer
station?
line on Good Wives.
Yep, I'm aware of that. Yep.
I
So
don't
you
know.
said you just haven't tied in?
I'm
I
sure.
don't think there's anything, any buildings on the property that are tied
They're
in.
tied in, but there is a line there.
Right.
Oh, yeah, no question.
Okay, understood.
yeah, my understanding was that the sewer lines went to the circle and stopped there.
Yep, okay.
The circle on Great
I
Island.
mean, I bring it up because, you know, a lot of the houses are old and the systems have got to be,
You know, sound adjacent
Yeah.
septic systems.
Thank you for that. That's easy enough to ask. If when
Yeah.
Ed's providing the update, either he'll
yep,
address that right out, or that's a good question to be aware of. So thank you
yeah.
for that. I did find a piece of paper I was looking for with the ex officio members. First Selectman, Kate Bush, Jennifer Charneski, Don Anderson, Chief of Police, Bobby Bush, Fire Marshal, Tony Capanella, Facilities Supervisor, here's the one I was looking for, Bill Cavers, Coastal Waters.
Yeah.
So, and so, I think, did you just ask if we're getting input from Coastal Waters? They're ex officio and will be looped in because obviously it's a very sensitive environment. and a lot of coastal issues to contend with. And so what I'm envisioning is if there is one or more members focusing on coastal, we'll coordinate with Bill or whoever Bill designates from that team. And then, of course, the Department of Public Works Director, Pam Geary, and Mark McEwen, Director of Emergency Management. And then on staff, you've got other non-ex officio. So that's what I was looking for, though. I knew that, I thought coastal waters was involved. I just wanted, before saying it, make sure I saw them on the list. I'd like them to join if there's a tour to give us their perspective of what we're staring at as we walk around the shore. And it's pretty, we're all awestruck when we see it, but I personally would like to really get their perspective on the sensitive nature of some of that environment and the opportunities there we have to preserve it.
That's a good idea.
Yep. If you've got all these experts on how to develop things, I view them as probably the experts on the team about how to preserve at least that aspect of the island.
A while ago, Monica had said that they wanted access to the public by year end. It was discussed in a prime meeting. It's only 4 months from now,
Yeah.
basically.
The members, as they were polled, and these are folks who just met presumably the first time together,
Right.
definitely. That was item number one. If you watched the video.
Yeah.
No answers, because no one in that room had an answer. But staff is coming in, it's still going to be topic number one. How to get some basic access while in parallel, whatever this group is pursuing as far as intermediate and longer term ideas.
You got a road to get in and you got a place to put your car.
So on the theme of access, right, all the leases for all the homes were extended for an additional year, I think to spring of ¡24.
A single year.
Yeah. And both tenants and landlords, meaning the town, have the ability to call those leases on 90 days. So that would be, I think, with me, I'd feel pretty precarious. The lease that was not extended was the stables, right? And I think one of the universal may be strong, one of the very common reactions of the folks who did take the tour on the island was that having horses trotting around the Great Island and having town residents having pedestrian access to that island don't mix, because that's, whether it's the horse poop that is around or whether it's just the size of the horses and the cars and the people, like that's a bad mix. So for people to get access, there would have to be a decision on the fate of the stables. Again, I will, without hesitation, share my perspective that I think the stables need to go, because if we have, nothing would scream elitism more in this town than for us to spend $85 million on an island that's reserved for horses. So I think there has to be a wind down plan in order for there to be access to the island, there would have to be a wind down plan for the stables.
Well, if I
That's for the
understand it-
advisory committee to come
Right,
up with.
but I guess to the extent that, I guess I would then frame that as a question to you, Mark, like what is the wind down plan for the stables? Because, and I know that you don't have an answer, right, but that would be something we want to kind of, put back to the committee.
Is it a wind down, or is it what is the plan for the stables in that if it was some other type of access? Again, I'm not suggesting.
No, I mean, you
There's
can partition the island, here's the horses side,
There's
here's
no
the people
plan.
side.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Although the
Yeah.
Planning and Zoning Commission met this week and
Yes,
had a discussion about the Great Island.
they did.
And if I understood it correctly, they approved for them to go forward
With their application.
with the application as
A
a
special use.
a non-conforming special use application.
Yes.
Okay? And that's like temporary, I think, for 2 years, if I understand.
It was limited in its first form, I know that. I don't know if it's.
Yeah, it's limited
Yeah.
for 2 years. But I'm not aware of any particular limitations on the operation during that period of time.
My sense was it was a recognition that the operation is there and has been there, not that we have to turn this into a broad discussion, but a recognition of that, and as a bridge, I think you phrased it right, a bridge to until a final, decision is made on.
Yeah. Recommendations made.
Recommendation is made on what will happen and what would happen to the stables effect.
Which leads to who has to make the point about pedestrian safety, not pedestrian, not mixing things up, but, yeah, you did say pedestrian. Safety.
Like, you can partition it, there's horses on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and people on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday.
Or
You can
different parts
partition
of the
it,
island.
there's
Yeah.
the west side.
There's
and
a
the
lot
east
of
side.
different ways to
Yeah, I mean, you can do
do it.
that, you can do a whole bunch of ways, but again,
Yeah.
I think a common reaction of people who did take the tour was that you couldn't have horses all over the place and
In
cars
the same
and people
space.
all
Yeah,
over the place,
potentially.
because those things
Right.
just don't
So,
interface.
and I expect possibly one of the thoughts might be research how other municipalities are able to operate municipal stables.
The whole idea of a municipal stable is crazy, right? But I
Well,
mean,
this is off topic. I mean,
Yeah.
we're-
Right.
we're-
Yeah.
this is-
Let's
Beyond-
But I mean, it's on the
beyond
top of
purview
access.
the public
Yeah,
works
That's
district.
true.
let's move past
That's
it.
true.
Just-
Anything else on Great Island?
Just one more comment on Great Island. I mean, so John Zagrodsky asked for public comment or whatever, so we're all being members of the DMA.
Yes,
I put on a current affairs thing that's going to be in October,
okay.
where we're going to talk about issues such as the Palazzo, scrape it or develop it into a hotel. The stables, which beautiful as they are, what are we going to do with that building? I mean, this is going to be a public discussion among the Darien Old Men's Association, we'll call it.
Thank you,
So-
I think.
Yeah, but anyways, to air out.
Did he lump you in there?
He dragged me right into that. I belong to the men's association.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. I'll admit to the men's association, I'm not gonna accept very easily the old men.
Oh, let the record reflect.
That's what my wife tells me. Anyways,
Okay.
it's a public discussion among the citizenry, and I think it'll be useful.
Okay.
It was interesting that during the discussions of the application, that the application included bridle pads. But the woman who runs the stable said, I have no knowledge of any bridle pads that we use at all. So right there's, if I may say, a disconnect between what the town thought was appropriate to the stable in the application versus apparently the person who's operating the stable and what parts of the island she's actually utilizing. So I would think that however that develops, be it temporarily over the 2-year approval or beyond, should that occur, I think the boundaries definitely have to be closely examined.
Thank you for that. I remember that comment.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
stable operator was operating.
I think it would be very interesting to understand how much of Ed Gentile's time is being consumed by Great Island, because all of it is at the expense of doing something else in public works.
Correct.
So from a public works perspective, kind of what town resources are being consumed by this project, even as we speak in terms of remediation or preparation for anything else. We know that there are midterm issues in terms of roadways and the sewer system in particular, but beyond that, it's like, okay, is this 40% of the activities of the public works department today? Probably not, because there's a lot of paving going on. So there's good stuff being done, but, So,
Fair enough.
it
So,
remains to be seen.
Yeah, I share your concern about the budgetary implications. I mean, they have some money to play with for now, but when that runs out.
anything else on, thank you all for your comments. Anything else on Great Island? Last item is town buildings. I don't have anything on, outside of, again, the items that related to some of the buildings on the ARPA adjustments. So my plan would be, I've got 3 items to reach out to Ed on, just to hit the highlights. It was the Pedestrian Infrastructure Advisory Committee recommendations, how they've been acted upon. Isn't necessarily any further clarity on the ownership of the bridge, and budgetary items, activities at Great Island. My thought would be, if it makes sense to add an August meeting, if there's any interest in an August meeting, after the Great Island Advisory Committee meets again and gets the update. Or if there's anything startling coming out of when that public hearing is rescheduled for the drainage project. Right now, we don't have a meeting scheduled, but if there's cause to have a special meeting, we will. Otherwise, our next meeting will be the September meeting. With that,
Sounds good.
with
Sounds
that,
good.
I appreciate everyone's participation this evening and a nice summer evening. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
It's unanimous.
All in favor?